The day they removed our bedroom doors, I knew our family would never be the same. My mother stood in the hallway, watching the contractors unscrew hinges with tears streaming down her face, while my father directed them like a general commanding troops. They said it was for our protection, that after what happened to my brother Marcus, they couldn't risk losing another child to the darkness behind closed doors. I was 13 then, my sister Emma was 11, and neither of us understood how grief could transform love into something suffocating. It started 3 weeks after Marcus's funeral. He had been 17, brilliant and troubled in ways none of us had recognized until it was too late. The locked door to his bedroom had become my parents' obsession, the physical barrier they blamed for not seeing the signs, for not being able to save him. In their minds, if they had just been able to see him that night, to check on him one more time, everything would have been different. So they decided that in our house, there would be no more barriers, no more secrets, no more closed doors behind which tragedy could hide. The contractors they hired seemed confused by the project, but my parents were insistent. Every interior door in our 3-bedroom suburban home was removed. Not just bedroom doors, but bathroom doors, closet doors, even the door to the basement. My mother, Patricia, explained to them with manic energy that this was about creating a new way of living, a revolutionary approach to family life that would prevent any more tragedies. My father, Robert, stood beside her, nodding grimly, his grief manifesting as unwavering support for her increasingly extreme ideas. Emma and I watched from the living room as our home was systematically stripped of privacy. First the doors, then the locks on windows were removed because, as my mother explained, locks created barriers between family members. The bathroom door was replaced with a curtain that barely covered the doorframe, and even that was a compromise after the contractor refused to leave the space completely open. Our bedrooms, once our sanctuaries, became exposed spaces visible from the hallway at all times. That first night without doors was surreal. I lay in bed, acutely aware that anyone walking down the hall could see me. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement visible. Emma, always braver than her years suggested, tried to make light of it, joking that we were like fish in an aquarium. But I saw how she pulled her blankets up to her chin, how she turned to face the wall when she changed into her pajamas. We were learning to live exposed, and it was only the beginning. My mother's philosophy evolved rapidly. Within a month, she had read dozens of books on radical transparency, communal living, and the dangers of privacy. She quoted studies about how secrets destroy families, how openness prevents tragedy. She joined online forums where she found other parents who had lost children. Though none had taken such extreme measures, she became evangelical about her beliefs, writing blog posts about their journey toward complete family transparency that gained a small but devoted following of similarly grieving parents. The rules in our house multiplied. We had mandatory family meetings every evening where we were required to share every thought, feeling, and interaction from our day. Nothing was too minor or too private. I had to report on conversations with friends, feelings about boys at school, even the details of my changing body. Emma was forced to discuss her fears, her dreams, her struggles with math class. My father participated too, sharing details about his work that once would have been considered inappropriate for children. But in our transparent household, nothing was inappropriate anymore. School became my refuge, the only place where I could close a bathroom stall door, where I could have a conversation without reporting it later. But even that sanctuary was threatened when my mother decided to homeschool us. She couldn't bear the thought of us spending 8 hours a day in an environment she couldn't monitor. The transition happened quickly. Our desks moved into the living room, where she could observe our every moment of learning. Friends stopped coming over after witnessing our bizarre living situation. We became isolated, our world shrinking to the confines of our exposed home. The physical changes to the house continued. My father, once a private man who valued his study, threw himself into supporting my mother's vision. He helped her install cameras in the common areas, not for security from the outside world, but to ensure no family member could have a moment unobserved. The feeds played on a monitor in the kitchen where my mother spent most of her time. She called it the family hub, the heart of their transparent home where she could keep loving watch over all of us. Changing clothes became an elaborate dance. Emma and I perfected the art of speed dressing, turning away from the hallway, using blankets as shields. But my mother noticed and grew concerned. "Why are you hiding?" she would ask. "We're family. We've seen each other since you were babies." But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 14, my body changing in ways that made me desperately crave privacy. The lack of it felt like a constant violation, a stripping away of my developing sense of self. The shower situation was particularly humiliating. The curtain that replaced the bathroom door was sheer enough that silhouettes were visible. My mother insisted that this was necessary so she could ensure our safety while bathing. "What if you slip?" she reasoned. "What if you have a seizure? These things happen, and I won't lose another child to a closed door." So we showered knowing we could be seen, the water never hot enough to steam the mirrors that reflected our exposure from every angle. My father's participation in this new lifestyle was complete but mechanical. He followed the rules, attended the meetings, shared his daily experiences, but something in him had shut down after Marcus died. He moved through our transparent life like a ghost, present, but not really there. Sometimes I caught him staring at the space where Marcus's door used to be, and I wondered if he too questioned what we had become. But he never voiced doubts, never challenged my mother's increasingly extreme rules. Emma began showing signs of stress. She developed a stutter that appeared whenever she had to share at our family meetings. She started wetting the bed, something she hadn't done since she was 4. My mother's response was to move Emma's mattress into their room so she could monitor her through the night. "No shame in transparency," she would say, stripping the wet sheets in full view of everyone. "We all have bodies. We all have functions. Nothing to hide." I tried to protect Emma as much as I could. I would create distractions during the mandatory sharing time, elaborate stories about school to fill the time so she wouldn't have to speak as much. I taught her tricks for changing clothes quickly, for finding the few blind spots in our house where she could have a moment of peace. We developed a silent language, subtle gestures that communicated support and understanding in our fishbowl existence. The outside world began to notice something was wrong. Teachers asked about our sudden withdrawal from school. Neighbors whispered about the strange renovations, the lack of doors visible through our windows. But my mother had answers for everyone. She spoke eloquently about grief, about prevention, about the radical steps necessary to keep children safe from themselves. She was so convincing that some people left nodding, impressed by her dedication to her remaining children. My grandmother, my mother's mother, was the first family member to voice serious concerns. She visited one Sunday and was horrified by what she found. "Patricia, this isn't healthy," she said, watching as I rushed to the bathroom with the inadequate curtain. "These girls need privacy. They need to develop their own sense of self." The argument that followed was explosive. My mother accused her of being old-fashioned, of not understanding modern parenting, of wanting to create the same conditions that had killed Marcus. My grandmother left in tears, and we weren't allowed to see her again. As I turned 15, the situation grew more unbearable. My body was fully in the throes of puberty, and the lack of privacy felt like torture. I couldn't explore my own changing self without an audience. I couldn't process the normal confusing feelings of adolescence without having to report them in excruciating detail at our nightly meetings. I began to understand why Marcus had cherished his locked door so much, why he had fought so hard to maintain that small space of privacy. The breaking point came when my mother decided that separate beds were creating unnecessary barriers between family members. She had read about historical family sleeping arrangements, how entire families once shared single rooms, and decided this was the natural way humans were meant to live. She ordered 2 king-sized beds to be placed in the master bedroom, announcing that we would all sleep together like families did for thousands of years before modern isolation destroyed human connection. Emma's horror matched my own. We had learned to adapt to so much, but this felt like the final violation. That night, as we lay in the beds pushed together, my mother between Emma and me, my father on the far side, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me break. This wasn't living. This wasn't healing. This was a slow suffocation, a different kind of death than Marcus had chosen, but death nonetheless. I started planning my escape. Not suicide. Never that. I had seen what Marcus's choice had done to our family, how it had broken something that could never be repaired. But I needed to get out, to find a way to exist beyond my mother's suffocating transparency. I researched emancipation laws, foster care, anything that might offer a path to freedom. I was careful, clearing my browser history, using the school library computers when possible. Even my rebellion had to be secret in our transparent world. Emma, perceptive despite her youth, sensed my plans. She didn't say anything at our family meetings, but at night, in the dark of our shared room, she would reach across the space between our pushed-together beds and hold my hand. Her silent plea was clear: "Don't leave me alone in this." And so I stayed, trapped between my desperate need for escape and my responsibility to my little sister. The situation might have continued indefinitely if not for Uncle Daniel. He was my father's younger brother, recently divorced and temporarily homeless after losing his apartment. My mother, in her infinite transparency, invited him to stay with us. After all, she reasoned, family should support family, and their open-door policy, literally and figuratively, meant no one should be turned away. He arrived with 2 suitcases and a smile that made my skin crawl. Uncle Daniel was 41, unemployed, and had always given me uncomfortable feelings, even before our house became an exhibition space. Now, with no doors and no privacy, his presence felt like a threat I couldn't articulate. He set up a cot in what used to be Marcus's room, directly across from mine. The first night, I woke to find him standing in my doorway, just watching. When I gasped, he smiled and said he was just checking on me, making sure I was safe. "Can't be too careful," he said, echoing my mother's constant refrain. Within days, his behavior escalated. He would position himself where he could watch Emma and me change clothes. He volunteered to help with homeschooling, particularly physical education, suggesting exercises that required us to bend and stretch while he observed. He began timing his showers to coincide with ours, always needing to use the bathroom just as we were bathing. My mother saw his attentiveness as touching. A uncle stepped up to help fill the void left by Marcus. I tried to tell my parents about my discomfort, but in our culture of radical transparency, my concerns were dismissed as holdovers from an outdated need for privacy. "Uncle Daniel is family," my father said when I complained about him watching me. "Family means trust. Your discomfort is just social conditioning that we're working to overcome." My mother was even more dismissive, suggesting that my discomfort with natural family intimacy was exactly the kind of dangerous privacy-seeking that had killed Marcus. Emma stopped showering. She would wash herself with a wet cloth at the sink, rather than endure the exposure of the shower with Uncle Daniel lurking nearby. When my mother noticed, she was concerned, but for all the wrong reasons. She worried that Emma was developing unhealthy hygiene habits, that she was retreating into herself. More transparency was prescribed, more sharing, more family togetherness. Uncle Daniel volunteered to help Emma overcome her shower aversion, offering to wash her hair for her. My mother thought it was sweet. The night Uncle Daniel tried to get into bed with me remains vivid in my nightmares. It was 2 in the morning when I felt the mattress shift. He slid under the covers, pressing against me, whispering that he was cold, that family should keep each other warm. His hand found my waist, and I froze, caught between the trained compliance of our transparent household and every instinct screaming danger. When his hand moved lower, something primal kicked in. I shoved him hard, sending him tumbling off the bed. The noise woke everyone. Uncle Daniel quickly explained that he had been sleepwalking, that he was disoriented in the new environment. My parents believed him instantly. My mother was more concerned about my violent reaction, seeing it as a sign that I was developing the same dangerous tendencies toward isolation and aggression that had marked Marcus's final months. She scheduled extra family meetings focused on my issues with intimacy and trust, but I was done being transparent, done being exposed, done pretending this was normal or healthy or healing. The next day, while my mother was distracted with Emma's lessons and my father was at work, I walked to the neighbor's house, Mrs. Chen had always been kind, always seemed concerned when she saw us in the yard. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, I said simply, "My family is in trouble, and I need help." The story poured out of me in a rush. The doors, the cameras, the shared beds, Uncle Daniel's escalating behavior. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her face cycling through shock, horror, and determination. When I finished, She didn't hesitate. "You're safe here," she said. "Let me make some calls." Within an hour, social services had been notified. Within 3, a social worker was at our door. The scene that followed was chaos. My mother, confronted with outside interference in her transparent paradise, became hysterical. She accused me of betrayal, of choosing secrets over family, of dishonoring Marcus's memory. She showed the social worker her blog, her research, testimonials from other grieving parents who admired her approach. She presented our lifestyle as a philosophical choice, a healing journey that outsiders couldn't understand. But the social worker, a woman named Janet, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, saw through the rhetoric. She observed Uncle Daniel's positioning in the house, noticed how he watched Emma even during the interview. She documented the lack of doors, the cameras, the shared sleeping arrangements. She interviewed Emma privately, away from the house, and whatever my sister told her sealed our fate. By evening, Emma and I were in emergency foster care. The foster home was modest, run by an older couple who had seen too many broken children to be shocked by our story. But they gave us something we had forgotten existed: privacy, doors that closed and locked, a bathroom we could use without an audience, beds in separate rooms where we could sleep without surveillance. That first night, I locked my bedroom door and cried for hours, overwhelmed by the simple freedom of being alone. Emma struggled initially. She had been younger when our transparent life began, and it was all she really remembered. She would leave her door open, announce her bathroom visits, share every thought that crossed her mind. But slowly, gently, our foster parents helped her understand boundaries. They taught her that privacy wasn't dangerous, that having an inner life wasn't a betrayal of family. Watching her slowly unfold into her own person was like watching a flower bloom after years in darkness. The legal battle was swift and decisive. My parents' lawyer argued that they were pioneers in preventative parenting, that their methods, while unconventional, came from a place of love and loss. They brought in their own experts, grief counselors who testified about the extreme measures parents sometimes take after losing a child. Uncle Daniel presented himself as a concerned family member who had only wanted to help, painting me as a troubled teen who misinterpreted innocent familial affection. But our lawyer had ammunition they didn't expect. Emails from my blog, where she detailed plans to remove all walls in the house, not just doors. Uncle Daniel's history of inappropriate behavior with his ex-wife's daughter, carefully hidden but uncovered by diligent investigation. Testimony from teachers about our declining mental health. Mrs. Chen's powerful statement about the day I showed up at her door. The judge's decision was unanimous. Our parents maintained supervised visitation only, and Uncle Daniel was banned from any contact. The aftermath was complicated. My parents, stripped of their transparent kingdom, descended into different kinds of madness. My mother became obsessed with the legal system's failure to understand her vision, starting multiple blogs about parental rights and the dangers of governmental interference. My father, freed from the constant performance of transparency, seemed to wake from a 3-year dream. He began therapy, started questioning the choices they had made, even expressed regret in letters the court wouldn't let him send directly to us. Emma and I began the slow work of healing. Therapy helped, though it took months before either of us could speak freely without feeling like we were betraying some invisible rule. We learned to enjoy privacy without guilt, to have thoughts and feelings that belonged only to us. We decorated our rooms in the foster home, reveling in the ability to create spaces that reflected our individual personalities. Emma discovered art, finding in painting a way to express the things she couldn't yet say. I threw myself into writing, documenting our experience in journals I knew no one would ever read. School was an adjustment. We had been isolated for so long that normal teenage social dynamics felt foreign. But gradually, we found our footing. Emma made friends with quiet kids who didn't push her to share more than she was ready to. I joined the newspaper, finding purpose in telling other people's stories while keeping my own private. We were careful with our trust, perhaps overly so, but we were learning to navigate the world on our own terms. The hardest part was reconciling our love for our parents with the recognition of what they had done to us. They weren't evil people. They were broken people who had broken us in their brokenness. Their grief over Marcus had manifested as a suffocating love that nearly destroyed what remained of their family. In therapy, I learned to hold multiple truths: that my parents loved us and hurt us, that their intentions came from pain but resulted in harm, that I could forgive them someday without ever returning to that transparent prison. Uncle Daniel was convicted on multiple charges related to his behavior. During the trial, other victims came forward, painting a pattern of predatory behavior that my parents' transparent home had enabled to flourish. He received 5 years in prison, though it felt insufficient for the damage done. My mother attended every day of his trial, still convinced that the family's transparency had been healing rather than enabling. My father stopped attending after the first day, the reality of what they had exposed us to finally breaking through his grief-fogged compliance. We stayed with our foster family through the remainder of our childhood. They were patient people who understood that healing happens slowly, in small moments rather than grand gestures. They celebrated with us when Emma finally started closing her bedroom door, when I stopped announcing every movement I made through the house. They gave us the gift of ordinary life, school and chores and curfews, and all the normal teenage negotiations that we had been denied in our transparent existence. I was 18 when my grandmother reached out, having fought for years to gain access to us. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we could talk without the weight of our history pressing down. She looked older, worn by the loss of not just Marcus, but effectively all 3 of her grandchildren. She apologized for not fighting harder, for not recognizing sooner how dangerous my mother's grief had become. We cried together, mourning not just Marcus, but the family we might have been if grief hadn't twisted love into obsession. Emma and I decided to see our parents on Marcus's birthday, 5 years after his death. We met in a park, supervised by social workers, but trying for something resembling normal conversation. My mother had aged dramatically, her evangelical fervor replaced by a hollow confusion about how her perfect transparent family had fallen apart. My father seemed more present than he had in years, the therapy clearly helping him process not just Marcus's death, but his own complicity in what followed. The conversation was stilted, careful. We talked about safe topics like the weather, my college plans, Emma's art, but underneath ran currents of all the things we couldn't say. How do you bridge the gap between parents who removed every door and children who needed them? How do you reconcile love and harm when they're so intricately twisted together? We didn't find answers that day, but we found a tentative beginning to something that might someday resemble a relationship. College felt like another kind of freedom. I chose a school 3 states away, far enough that surprise visits were impossible. My dorm room became a sanctuary, decorated with pictures of Emma and our foster family, not a single photo from our transparent years. I studied psychology, driven to understand how grief could warp love so completely. My professors were intrigued by my insights into family dynamics, though they didn't know their source. Emma flourished in high school once I left. Without me to protect her, she found her own strength. She joined the drama club, finding in performance a controlled way to be seen that she could turn off when the curtain fell. She dated tentatively, learning to trust boys who respected her boundaries. She even started visiting our parents occasionally on her own terms, strong enough now to leave whenever she felt uncomfortable. The blog my mother had maintained about our transparent life became a cautionary tale in certain parenting forums. Other grieving parents wrote about how they had almost followed her path, how reading about our family's destruction had helped them seek healthier ways to process loss. It was a strange kind of vindication, knowing that our pain might prevent others from experiencing the same. My mother never acknowledged these discussions, but my father wrote once to say he hoped our story could help other families avoid their mistakes. I met James in my junior year of college. He was patient and kind, understanding when I needed to lock doors, even when I was just studying. He didn't push when I was vague about my family history, content to know me in the present rather than excavating my past. When I finally told him the whole story, expecting him to run, he held me while I cried and promised that any home we built together would have as many doors as I needed. Emma graduated high school with honors, her art portfolio earning her scholarships to several colleges. She chose one close to our foster parents, not ready yet for the complete independence I had craved. Her graduation was a small ceremony, just our foster family, Mrs. Chen, who had remained a steadfast support, and surprisingly, our father. He sat in the back, crying quietly as Emma walked across the stage, perhaps seeing in her success a glimmer of what all his children might have achieved if grief hadn't derailed our lives. The summer before my senior year, I returned to our old neighborhood. The house had been sold years earlier, the new owners installing fresh doors and removing the cameras, turning it back into a normal family home. I parked across the street, watching children play in the yard where Emma and I had existed in our fishbowl. It looked so ordinary now, no hint of the bizarre experiment in transparency that had nearly destroyed us. Mrs. Chen invited me for tea, eager to hear about college and my plans. She told me about the day I had appeared at her door, how she had known immediately that something was terribly wrong, but hadn't known how to help until I asked. She had carried guilt about not intervening sooner, about the signs she had seen but hadn't acted on. I assured her that she had saved us exactly when we needed saving, that her willingness to listen and act had changed everything. My thesis explored the intersection of grief, parenting, and privacy. My advisor praised its insight, but warned it might be too personal for academic work. I revised it, adding distance and objectivity, turning our lived experience into theoretical framework. But I kept the original version, raw and honest, knowing that someday I might be ready to share it more broadly. Stories of survival matter, even when, especially when, they're messy and complicated. Emma's first gallery show featured a series of paintings about boundaries, abstract pieces that suggested walls and doors and windows, barriers that protected rather than imprisoned. The artist's statement was vague, talking about the universal need for both connection and separation. But I saw our history in every brushstroke, our journey from exposure to privacy rendered in color and form. Several pieces sold, including one to a woman who said it perfectly captured her own struggle with boundaries. Emma just smiled and thanked her, keeping our story private, even as she shared its emotional truth. Therapy continued intermittently for both of us. Some wounds heal cleanly, others require ongoing attention. We learned to recognize our triggers, like the panic I felt when anyone suggested removing a door for repairs, or Emma's anxiety about shared living spaces. We developed coping strategies, ways to honor our need for privacy without letting it isolate us. Healing wasn't a destination, but a journey, one we traveled at our own pace. Our foster parents officially adopted us when Emma turned 18. It was largely symbolic since we were both adults, but the ceremony felt like a proper ending to one chapter and beginning of another. We took their last name, Chen, finding in it a fresh start and a connection to the woman who had first offered help. Our biological parents weren't invited to the ceremony, but we told them about it afterward. My mother cried, my father said he was happy we had found a real family. I started graduate school, still fascinated by family dynamics and the ways love can become distorted. My research focused on children who had experienced unusual family structures, finding common threads in our adaptations and resilience. I was careful about my own disclosure, but occasionally, when I met someone whose story resonated with mine, I would share pieces of our experience. The relief in their eyes at being understood was worth the vulnerability of exposure. Emma and I developed our own holiday traditions. Thanksgiving with the Chens, Christmas split between friends and chosen family. We created rituals that honored both connection and autonomy, like cooking together, but eating in separate rooms if we needed space, or watching movies with the understanding that anyone could leave without explanation. We were rewriting the rules of family, keeping what worked and discarding what had harmed us. The 5-year anniversary of leaving our transparent home passed quietly. Emma and I met for dinner, acknowledging the date without dwelling on it. We had built good lives, found our paths, created the boundaries our parents had tried to eliminate. The scars remained, but no longer defined us. We were more than survivors of a bizarre social experiment. We were artists and scholars, friends and partners, complete individuals who had fought for the right to be complex and private and whole. I published my first article about family trauma and privacy in an academic journal. I used pseudonyms and changed details, but the emotional truth remained. The response was overwhelming. Emails from therapists using it in their practice, from adult children recognizing their own boundary violations, from parents questioning their own choices. One email stood out. unsigned but unmistakably from my father. "I'm sorry," it said simply, "and I'm proud of who you've become despite us." Emma fell in love with a fellow artist who understood her need for space. Their relationship was a dance of coming together and pulling apart, respecting each other's boundaries while building intimacy. Watching her navigate love on her own terms, seeing her trust without sacrificing herself, felt like victory. She had broken the cycle, refused to let our history dictate her future. When they moved in together, she insisted on a two-bedroom apartment. "Everyone needs a door they can close," she explained, and he understood without question. Our story spread in whispers through certain communities: support groups for unusual family dynamics, forums for adult children of boundary-violating parents, therapists specializing in privacy trauma. We became inadvertent experts on survival, on rebuilding after systematic boundary destruction. Sometimes we spoke at conferences, carefully, anonymously, sharing what we had learned about the difference between connection and enmeshment, between family and fusion. My wedding was small, intimate, with doors that remained closed to anyone not explicitly invited. Emma was my maid of honor, radiant in a dress she had designed herself. The Chens walked me down the aisle, having earned that right through years of patient love. We had decided not to invite our biological parents, a choice that brought both relief and sadness. Some bridges, once burned by others, cannot be rebuilt, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. James and I bought a house with more doors than strictly necessary. Each room could be closed off, creating private spaces within our shared home. He understood my need to know I could be alone, that privacy was not about keeping him out, but about maintaining my sense of self. We painted the doors different colors, celebrating rather than hiding these symbols of autonomy. Our home was open by choice, not mandate, welcoming because it could also be closed. Emma's art evolved, moving from abstract boundaries to portraits of resilience. She painted survivors of various traumas, capturing in their faces the particular strength that comes from reclaiming agency. Her exhibition drew crowds, critics praising her ability to capture both vulnerability and power. I stood in the gallery, watching strangers connect with her work, seeing our journey transformed into universal truth about the human need for both connection and separation. 10 years after leaving our transparent prison, I became pregnant. The news brought unexpected anxiety about what kind of parent I would be, whether I could avoid the extremes that had marked my own upbringing. James reminded me that awareness was protection, that my fear of repeating history was itself insurance against it. Still, I spent sleepless nights planning the nursery, ensuring it had a door that could close, windows that could open, space for a child to grow into their own person. Emma threw herself into becoming an aunt, knitting blankets and painting murals, creating beauty for this new life. She spoke to my belly about boundaries and choices, about the gift of being seen and the equal gift of privacy. We laughed about her premature lessons, but I was grateful. This child would grow up surrounded by people who understood that love meant respecting autonomy, that protection didn't require surveillance. The baby came early, a daughter we named Hope, not for some saccharine belief that everything happens for a reason, but for the harder truth that life continues, that we can build something beautiful from broken pieces. As I held her, I thought about Marcus, the brother whose death had started our family's destruction. I wondered who he might have become if his need for privacy had been respected, rather than posthumously demonized. I promised him silently that his niece would have all the doors she needed. Our parents learned about Hope through mutual acquaintances. My mother sent a letter full of parenting advice about openness and honesty, seemingly having learned nothing from our family's collapse. My father sent a savings bond and a note saying he understood if we didn't want contact, but wanted to contribute something to her future. Emma and I discussed it extensively before deciding that Hope would know her biological grandparents existed, but wouldn't meet them until she was old enough to understand and enforce boundaries. Raising Hope with intentional respect for her autonomy, while still keeping her safe, required constant negotiation. When she was 2 and wanted to close her bedroom door, we let her, even though parenting books suggested otherwise. We knocked before entering, teaching by example that her space was hers. When she was 5 and demanded privacy in the bathroom, We celebrated this developmental milestone rather than seeing it as rejection. Every boundary she set was a small victory, proof that she was developing the sense of self that had been systematically stripped from Emma and me. I returned to school for my doctorate, writing my dissertation on the long-term effects of privacy violation in family systems. My advisor pushed me to include more of my personal experience, recognizing that my insights came from lived experience as much as academic study. The defense was emotional. Committee members moved by the integration of theory and survival. Dr. Chen looked proud as she signed the approval forms, having supported not just my academic journey, but my entire path to healing. Emma married in an art gallery, surrounded by her work depicting boundaries and connection. Her husband understood her need for separate studio space, for hours alone with her craft. Their vows included promises about respecting each other's need for solitude, about knocking before entering, about the revolutionary act of choosing to be together rather than being forced by circumstance or manipulation. Even our wedding gifts reflected our journey. Beautiful doors from a local craftsman, symbolic and practical reminders of what we had fought to reclaim. Life settled into rhythms that would seem boring to some, but felt miraculous to us. Family dinners where people could leave the table when ready. Holiday gatherings where anyone could take breaks in private spaces. Phone calls that could be declined without explanation. The ordinary privacy that most people take for granted remained precious to us. Each closed door, a small celebration of autonomy. Hope grew into a confident child who knew her own mind. She kept a diary with a tiny lock, understanding already that some thoughts belonged only to her. She had sleepovers with friends where the Haesong could whisper secrets behind closed doors. She trusted us with her struggles and joys, sharing not because she had to, but because she chose to. Watching her natural, easy relationship with privacy showed us how far we had come from the transparent prison of our youth. The Chens aged gracefully, their patience with us evolving into deep friendship as we all became adults together. They respected our need for boundaries, even as they remained our chosen parents, available when we needed them, absent when we needed space. Their biological children welcomed us as siblings, understanding that family could be built through choice as much as blood. Holiday gatherings at their house were exercises in cheerful chaos, with bedroom doors that closed when anyone needed quiet, bathrooms that locked, spaces for both togetherness and solitude. Sometimes I thought about writing our story fully, without pseudonyms or altered details, but privacy had become too precious to sacrifice for the uncertain benefit of total disclosure. Instead, I wrote fiction that captured emotional truth, stories about families navigating the balance between connection and autonomy. Readers found themselves in these tales, recognizing their own struggles with boundaries and enmeshment. The stories sparked conversations, perhaps changing lives in small ways, honoring our journey without exploiting it. Emma's art continued evolving, her exhibitions drawing larger crowds and critical acclaim. She never explicitly painted our story, but those who knew us could see it in every piece. The girl who had been forced to live in a fishbowl had transformed that experience into beauty, showing others that survival could become art. She mentored young artists, especially those healing from their own boundary violations, teaching them that their experiences were valid subjects for expression. 20 years after Marcus's death, I visited his grave alone. The family plots surrounded his, including spaces reserved for our parents whenever their time came. I told him about hope, about Emma's success, about the lives we had built from the wreckage of our childhood. I thanked him for the locked door that had protected his final moments from becoming a spectacle, even as that privacy had been blamed for everything that followed. I left flowers and a photo of hope, promising that his niece would grow up in a world where doors were neither enemies nor saviors, but simple tools for maintaining healthy boundaries. Our parents aged in their separate lives, my mother still writing about family transparency, though her audience had dwindled, my father finding peace in woodworking and volunteer work. We exchanged birthday cards and brief updates, maintaining a connection that respected the distance necessary for our well-being. They never fully understood what they had done to us, but they had stopped trying to justify it. That was its own kind of progress. I became a therapist myself, specializing in helping families navigate boundaries after trauma. My office had multiple doors, allowing clients to choose their level of enclosure. Some needed the safety of closed spaces, others found openness healing. I learned to read the subtle signals to recognize when someone had been violated by too much exposure or damaged by too much isolation. My own experience informed but didn't dominate my practice, a tool among many for helping others heal. Hope entered adolescence with the normal desire for privacy that we celebrated rather than feared. Her diary evolved into password-protected documents. She spent hours in her room with the door closed, music playing, navigating the complexities of growing up. Emma and I watched with joy rather than concern, seeing her healthy development as the ultimate repudiation of our parents' Fulsenian philosophy. She was becoming her own person, separate from but connected to us exactly as it should be. The day Hope left for college, Emma and I stood in her empty room, remembering our own first taste of real freedom. We had given her what we couldn't have, the gradual, supported transition to independence, rather than the desperate escape we had needed. She texted from her dorm, excited about her roommate, the classes, the door to her room that locked. We celebrated her joy while acknowledging our own bittersweet emotions, the natural grief of parents watching their child claim their separate life. Our story became part of academic literature, cited in papers about family trauma, privacy, and resilience. Researchers contacted us occasionally, wanting to study the long-term effects of our unique upbringing. We participated selectively, sharing what might help others while maintaining the privacy we had fought so hard to claim. Our experience had taught us that some stories were meant to be preserved in careful silence, honored through the lives we built rather than the words we spoke. Emma and her husband adopted siblings from foster care, children who had their own complex relationships with boundaries and trust. She approached motherhood with intentional respect for their need to control their own spaces and stories. Their adjustment was slow, sometimes painful, but she had learned patience from our own journey. Watching her parent with such wisdom, seeing her create the family we had deserved, felt like the completion of a circle we had started drawing years ago when we first reclaimed our right to close a door. I retired from active practice at 60, having spent decades helping others navigate the complexities of family boundaries. My final paper explored the evolution of privacy in family systems, tracing changes in cultural attitudes toward transparency and autonomy. It was well received, sparking discussions about the balance between protection and control, connection and separation. I dedicated it to Hope, Emma, and the Chens, the family that had taught me that love meant respecting the spaces between us as much as the bonds that connected us. The house where we had lived our transparent life was demolished, the land redeveloped into condos. Emma and I attended the demolition, not from nostalgia, but from a need to see that physical space erased. As the walls came down, this time permanently, we held hands and remembered the girls we had been, forced to live without barriers, fighting for the right to exist as individuals. The dust settled, the land was cleared, and with it went the last physical reminder of our transparent prison. Hope became a lawyer specializing in family law, her childhood giving her unique insights into the complexities of custody and protection. She fought for children's rights to privacy, to agency, to boundaries even within family structures. Her work honored our story without exploiting it, using law to protect others from what we had endured. When she argued cases, I heard echoes of the girl who had demanded her right to close her bedroom door at 2 years old. Our parents died within months of each other. My mother first, my father following, as if he had only been waiting for permission to let go. We attended their funerals, Emma and I standing together as we had through everything. The eulogies spoke of their dedication to family, their unique approach to parenting, the tragedy of losing Marcus. We didn't correct the narrative, letting others remember them as they chose. In death, they deserved the privacy they had denied us in life. Sorting through their belongings, we found boxes of photos from before, when we had been a normal family, with doors and walls and privacy. 4-year-old Emma grinning from her bedroom doorway, 7-year-old me reading in my closet hideaway, Marcus at 15, content in his room with his books and music, normal children in a normal house, before grief transformed love into suffocation. We kept some photos, burned others, honoring the complex truth of our history. The inheritance was substantial, our parents having lived frugally even as they destroyed our home in pursuit of transparency. Emma and I discussed extensively before deciding to use the money to fund a foundation supporting children's rights to privacy and autonomy within family systems. We named it after Marcus, honoring the brother whose need for a locked door had started everything. The foundation funded research, supported legal advocacy, and provided resources for families struggling to balance connection and boundaries. In our 70s, Emma and I remained close despite living in different states. We visited regularly, staying in each other's guest rooms, doors that closed firmly each night. Our relationship had survived what should have destroyed it, transformed by trauma, but not defined by it. We could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours, sharing what we chose, keeping private what we needed. The forced transparency of our youth had taught us that true intimacy was built on choice, not compulsion. Hope had children of her own, raising them with the same intentional respect for boundaries that had marked her own upbringing. Watching my grandchildren naturally claim their privacy, seeing them trust us with their thoughts because they could also withhold them, felt like final proof that cycles could be broken. They would never know the transparent prison their grandmother and great-aunt had survived, would take for granted the doors and walls and private spaces that we had fought to reclaim. Looking back across the decades, I marveled at the journey from that exposed house to this richly private life. We had survived something that should have broken us, built lives that honored both connection and autonomy. Our story wasn't one of triumphant revelation or public vindication, but of quiet, daily choices to respect boundaries, to create safety through privacy rather than surveillance. We had learned that families could be transparent by choice, sharing from abundance rather than compulsion. The tree in my backyard had grown tall over the years, its branches creating private shadows, spaces where grandchildren could hide and whisper secrets. Sometimes I sat beneath it, remembering the girls who had nowhere to hide, who had made themselves small in the corners of an exposed house. Those girls had survived, had claimed their right to privacy, had built lives rich with chosen connections and respected boundaries. They had proven that transparency without consent was not love but control. That true family meant respecting the doors between us as much as the bridges. As evening fell and I prepared for bed in my room with its door that locked, its windows that opened to let in night air, I thought about all the people still trapped in their own transparent prisons, those whose privacy was violated by family, by systems, by philosophies that confused exposure with care. Our story was just one among many, but perhaps its telling in whispers and academic papers, and the lives we had built would help others claim their own right to close a door, to keep a secret, to exist as whole individuals even within loving families. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. Breakfast with Hope and her children, a video call with Emma about her latest exhibition, ordinary life made extraordinary by our history. But tonight, I would close my door, turn off the lights, and exist in the private darkness that had once been forbidden. In that simple act lay revolution, resistance, and ultimately, peace. The girl who had lived in a transparent house had become a woman who understood that love meant respecting the walls between us. That connection was deepened, not destroyed, by honoring each other's right to sometimes, gently, close the door.